Hello friends and welcome or welcome back to Diary of Fiction and welcome to my top favorite books of 2024. I'm so excited to be filming this. 2024 was such a special year for me. I opened up Diary of Fiction. I prioritized lots of books that I had been meaning to read for a while. I got to know myself further as a reader and just my reading taste in general, and just found books that absolutely changed my life. Like, there's before me and after me reading these books. They just came to me at the right time and I'm so glad that I read them and I want to share them with you all. I want to recommend them. I hope there's at least one book in this list that you might want to pick up. Without further ado, let's get started with the list. Oh wait, so I'm not just gonna talk about my favorite books, I'll also mention my favorite authors of the year as I talk about these books, and then at the end I have a few honorable mentions that I want to talk about as well. So now, without further ado, let's get started. So in our fifth spot, we have none other than Mona Awad. I read two books by her this year, Bunny and All's Well, but the book that actually is gonna get the spotlight for my favorite book of 2024 is All's Well. I already did talk about Bunny in my favorite books of all time, so if you want to hear my thoughts on that, you can go watch that video. It's still an amazing book, but I feel like I want to talk about this one because it's the first book that I read by her, and if it wasn't because of this, I wouldn't have picked up this. And also, this was such a surprise to me and I was really mind blown, and I still to this day can't stop thinking about it, and I just want a chance to talk about it. So hold on, I just organized my shelves again, so anyway, so All's Well depicts the lack for a safe space for women to express their physical pain that is invisible to others in a setting such as academia. We're following our main character Miranda, who as a young actress she suffered from an accident and now she lives with chronic pain, and in the present she is now a college theater director and her role is to set up a play for the students, and she chooses to do All's Well. However, the environment in which she works in seems to be always against her because her students don't really want to do this play. They don't really like her as well. The people she works with also fail to really understand her, and the entire time we're in Miranda's world, internal world, and we're seeing how it starts to collapse as the book progresses with so much negativity around her and lack of understanding and empathy, and we see her just kind of fall deeper and deeper into the sadness that she feels and how she's also dealing with heartbreak. I don't remember, I think it was that she was going through a divorce, I'm not really sure. There's a lot of things in this book that are just up to interpretation, and in Mona Awad's fashion, her writing style, what I discovered is that it's basically characterized by having dark humor, a little bit of a satire, and you're following an unreliable main character. So a lot of the times you don't really know if what you're reading is real, and so that makes the book even more gripping for the reader because it leaves you thinking about it months even after you finished reading it. For me, I found this book on a dark academia table. What made me want to pick it up was literally the cover. It was one of those books that I picked up just because I thought, you know what, I know nothing about this book, but I want to give it a go and see what I think about it because it looks and sounds intriguing, even though, to be honest, I don't think I actually understood what it was about. That's why the first few pages I was a little bit lost and it took me a little bit to get into it. But once you start understanding how Mona Awad tells her stories and you start to realize that she's playing with our minds a little bit, then it's when the book gets interesting. Not only that, but I feel like the entire time you're trying to make sense of things, trying to understand what's going on, and at the end of it, it's mind-blowing, to be honest, especially when you start to put pieces together and try to interpret the meaning of each little thing that she adds. I recommend for this book reading the Q&A in the back because that gave me an entirely different perspective, also from the perspective of Mona Awad and why she chose to use certain elements in the story. Certain decisions that she made as part of the story made the story more of a satire, and I can't really tell you those things because I don't want to spoil you, but there's one thing in particular that she uses that I didn't even realize, I didn't even think of it too much, to emphasize the fact that our main character is just a theater professor, so she's just being dramatic. So she uses it as a tool to, like, what's the word implement that kind of lack of credibility that she has as a person and how people around her like don't believe what she says or don't really take her seriously. So this is such an amazing novel. I highly recommend. I would recommend looking at content warnings. It does deal with heavy topics, and I feel like in general Mona Awad's books are always something on the surface, but you always have to dig deeper and then you'll be surprised, especially with Bunny as well. Both of these characters have sort of like a very, I guess, pessimistic view of the world just because of how much pain is in their internal world, and you see them struggling with loneliness. wonderful novels. I think they are a little bit heavy, but I highly recommend if you're looking for maybe something different, something more unique, a little bit strange, and you're ready to dive into the roller coaster that is her writing style, to be honest. But I am really a fan of her, especially because she touches on topics such as like chronic pain. In Bunny, she talks about privilege and also like female friendships. So just the topics she touches on, she targets them again in a very strange but also like it makes sense. It makes sense. A very strange way that also somehow makes sense at the end. So yes. All's Well by Mona Wet. Our fourth author on this list is Ava Reid. Ava Reid is a wonderful storyteller. Every time I think about these books, I'm immediately transported into the world that these books were set in. I have a vision for how the world looks, the setting, the atmosphere. They're always very gothic, dark fantasies. And again, I would recommend content warnings for these. If you want to hear some of my thoughts for Juniper and Thorn, you can go watch my full book reading list. My full book reading wrap up. That's where I talk about this book more in depth, and I recommend watching that video. But today we're gonna talk about the book that I've mentioned multiple times, but I don't think I've actually gone over why is it that I love it so much, and that is A Study in Drowning. This was the first book that I read by her. I read it through the library, and now I have the special edition, which makes me so happy. Let's start by talking about what made me connect with this story from the very beginning, and that literally was the introduction of our main character, Effie. She's an architecture student, first year architecture student, whose dream is to actually study literature, but women in this world aren't allowed to do so. So in fact, she actually has to settle for the second most prestigious major, which is architecture. So while she's navigating her first year in college, she also has a favorite author who wrote this story that basically gives her a safe space, because she also has been hunted by visions of this demon king, and I think this will all make more sense once you read the book. Basically, this author's family, they're hosting a contest for first year architecture students to go to his house and redesign it. And obviously, because she's the main character, she's gonna go to his house, and when she's there, she's actually gonna find an academic rival who thinks that this author is actually a fraud and wants to prove that. They're gonna have a very cute romance, by the way. But ultimately, the book is about women reclaiming their own stories. There's a lot of trauma in this book and very heavy topics, so I would recommend looking at content warnings, although I do believe this is a young adult book, but I do think there are some more serious topics discussed. So I love the way that Ava Reid wrote Effie's character, how she would intertwine her past as we would learn more about her and what is basically hunting her. I love the setting of it, how literally like this cover is a perfect depiction, I think, of what I would imagine the setting as, and like where they were at, the house, the town they were in. And there were a few like a little bit, not like scary, like this is like horror, but there were a few times where, you know, I was surprised that it was a little bit, just a little bit scary. And there is a second book coming out that when I literally saw that there was a second book, and that was so random that I decided to search up like Ava Reid, and I saw the cover for the second book. Look at this. Look at how beautiful that is. And it matches this one, and it has both of them on the cover. And I read this in like February, so it was really early in the year that I got to this, so I definitely need to give it a reread. I feel like there are certain details that I'm forgetting about. A Study in Drowning by Ava Reid. And number 3, we have one of my most annotated books of the year. One for My Enemy by Olivia Blake, who is, I think, probably gonna become one of my favorite authors. I've only read one book by her, so I still feel like I need to try out her other work, but specifically this one. This one was so good. This is a standalone urban fantasy, follows 2 rival witch families set in New York City. They both have their own criminal empires, so they're in competition with one another. One family is called the Antonovus family, and the other one the Featherovs family. And did I say that they were witches? Yes, they're witches. This book is for those of you who love character-driven stories. Like, I feel like if you love the Raven Boys, this is a book that you would absolutely devour because of how much you get to learn about the characters. It's just, there's not a lot of plot. It's mainly about just the characters and their relationships with one another, like all these questions about loyalty and family, whether you follow your heart versus your family's like obligations and expectations. I feel like there's a lot about also like older sibling and younger sibling like dynamics as well, and a lot of drama and forbidden love and pain and suffering. I feel like the first half of the book immediately grabbed my attention because we're following one of the younger Antonovus Antonova's sisters, and she is currently attending college. And we also have the perspective, one of the Featherup's brothers, they're planning sort of like a new business, so he actually goes to where the Antonova sister is at, and they meet without really knowing that they're actually rivals. And the story just kind of goes from there. It is a little bit insta-lovey, I would say. I think you need to get past that in order to enjoy the story. I feel like it's more about what happens after, but it's just the way that it's so dramatic, and it's based, oh, I didn't say this before, sorry. It is basically a Romeo and Juliet retelling. So that's a very important fact that I should have mentioned earlier. Sorry about that. But because it's a Romeo and Juliet retelling, and it's also told as if it were a play, there's some lines in this book that just... And getting to know about the history of these families, not only from the perspective of the, I guess, younger generation, but also from the perspective of their parents. Why is it that they made the decisions that they made? Why is it that they're rivals in the first place? And all these little things, I feel like it took me by surprise. The second half of this book, I feel like, has a few like gothic elements that I really enjoyed. It's more fantasy heavy. Like, it has like a little bit of that. I don't know. For some reason, it made me feel, and it might be because I had just watched Beetlejuice before reading this, but I imagined it as a Tim Burton movie a little bit. This is one of my favorite books, and it made me cry. If you're looking again for a standalone fantasy book, I would highly recommend One for My Enemy by Olivia Blake. And I've said it before, but she can make me feel so much in a single sentence. It's crazy. So our number 2 book of 2024 is The Dragon Republic by R.F. Kuang. So this is the second book in the Poppy Word trilogy, a trilogy that I started in 2024. So the Poppy Word technically is also part of the same spot. I'll hold the Poppy Word just so that I can explain a little bit more about what trilogy is about in case you're not familiar with it. But this was R.F. Kuang's debut novel, which is so impressive, and I think she was around, I think like 20, like early 20s or 19 even. I actually don't remember. These books are incredible. They're based off real life history, specifically Chinese history. Each of the books, they follow like a different historical events or a few historical events, and they draw inspiration from that. That way I feel like R.F. Kuang was also able to like shine light on like unknown parts of history or like forgotten parts of history and tell her story that way. And so I feel like knowing that adds another layer to the story that makes it even more complex. So this is a trilogy that's filled with war and politics and very devastating events. There's little to no happy moments in the series. There's very little lighthearted moments. But in this first book, we're following our main character, Rin, who, by the way, is my favorite character ever. Like, my favorite main character ever. She is extremely resilient, but also extremely flawed, extremely human, basically. Just like one of the most realistic characters I've ever read about in a fantasy world. But anyway, we're following Rin. She's an orphan and she's destined to marry a man, but she doesn't want this future for herself, so she's gonna go look for resources to this tutor. She's gonna study herself and teach herself day and night everything that she needs to take this test, and she's actually gonna get the highest score. Gonna go to Synagard Academy, but nobody believes that she actually got the highest score because of where she comes from and the color of her skin, and she's treated really poorly at this academy. It is there, however, that she also figures out that she's a shaman, so she has the power to summon the power of gods, but that comes at a cost. It is very painful, and it also causes you to lose your mental stability. So there's a lot that Rin goes through, so much trauma, so many things that she witnesses. She sees how the war affects her and those around her, and it's just a character development, I guess, how she's also just a kid in this world that is filled with war and violence, and there's so much that she doesn't even have time to process. She's just a character that is filled with anger and resentment, but she's also in this like survival mode. The Poppy Word trilogy by R.F. Kuang. And our number 1 spot, I think you can guess this if you've seen like my earlier videos, but Babel by R.F. Kuang. This book is core dark academia. This is what dark academia should be about, in my opinion. It took me by surprise. I bought this book alongside All's Well. They were both at the dark academia table, and I think I was just in that mood. I'm very glad I picked up both. It was one of the only times, honestly, that I've ever got 2 books and read them back to back, which is This was also literally the first or second book or third, I don't know, book that I read in the year, and nothing has topped it, so it's insane. It's a masterpiece to me. This book is a historical fiction book with a few fantasy elements and also dark academia elements. It is set in the 1820s and we're following Robin, who is from China. His family just recently passed away from cholera. His British professor comes and saves him, takes him back to England, and gives him resources for him to learn about languages so that he can get admitted into Babel, the most prestigious institution of translation. Once he's there, we're gonna meet the rest of the cast of characters, but we're also gonna find out that this is also sustaining the British Empire. Not only that, but I thought that the most interesting part about this book was the magic system, the discussion on the power of language and linguistics. That to me is what made me want to pick up the book in the first place. When I heard that the magic system in this book was about what is lost in translation, so basically there's like this magical silver bars that they're produced at the top of Babel, and they have like a word on one side and the translation on the other, and when said out loud, that's where the magic comes from. And it's like this whole discussion on translating and like languages, and it's so thought-provoking. The book also discusses class, race, and identity in a really beautiful way. There's just so many layers to this story that I think you can analyze further and probably write an entire essay on this. And this to me is like the standard, I guess, for what a dark academia should be like. It still has like a few of those elements that are seen in other dark academia books, but I like the way that Ralph Kwong inserted them in this story. The ending of this book, insert clip of me just staring at a wall right after. I was literally stressed out. It was something that I will remember forever and that I'm glad that I have documented. It was brilliant from the first page all the way to the last page. My top favorite book of 2024, and if you haven't read it, I hope it's in your list for 2025. Now my two honorable mentions. So the first one is another book by R.F. Kuang, which I read immediately after Babel, and that's Yellowface. I'm pretty sure you've heard about this book or you've seen it around. To me, the most impressive thing about this book was how versatile her writing could be, because this book is actually written from the perspective of the antagonist of the story. It is so well written too. In this book, we're following two best friends, June Hayward and Athena Liu, and they both were friends in college when they were studying to become writers. Only one of them, Athena, has been successful and a critically acclaimed author, whereas June feels behind on her writing career and she has a lot of resentment towards her friend. And one day while they're hanging out, Athena actually suffers from an accident that causes her to pass away, and June actually finds one of her manuscripts that is unpublished and decides to publish it herself. The thing about it is that June changes her name to June Song, and also the book is about Chinese laborers and how they contributed to World War II. And so basically Yellowface is just an exploration of who should tell what story or whose story, and I thought it was very thought-provoking. Unlike anything that I've ever read before, it almost felt like a fiction book, as if you were reading someone's memoir, but it's actually fiction. That's how well she wrote this story. It also gives a very interesting and very transparent view into the publishing world and the steps that it takes to publish a novel, and which authors are typically chosen, which types of books, etc, etc. I thought that was also very important, especially right now where books are booming, and I think sometimes with the popularity of books we can sometimes disregard or forget about certain aspects. Overall, I found this book to be very insightful, very relevant, and needed right now. Also, can I say that I was reading this book in public transportation, and the amount of times that I literally gasped out loud while reading this book, I will forget there were people around me, and I literally had to look up inside. I was just like, did anybody see me? Alright, the next book is a young adult contemporary novel that I read also in the beginning of 2024, but it's been in my mind ever since, and that is Aristoteles and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe. If you've been watching booktube for years now, you'll remember when this came out and everybody loved it. So I finally decided to randomly pick it up. It was available in Libby, I believe. This is a coming of age story about two adolescents who are navigating what it is to grow up and just sort of have that moment where you start becoming very conscious about everything around you. And so these two characters are brought together because of their, like, I guess, like, uncomfortable feelings that they have at home, like everything they're dealing with, and they find comfort with each other and sort of like relief from the outside world because they're both on the same page and they both are dealing with their own personal struggles, like whether that was like family issues or relationships, identity. And so when they come together, it's just very sweet and emotional because these two characters are at a point in their lives where everything is just so confusing, and so they're trying together to unravel the secrets of the universe. universe. I feel like it just very beautifully kind of depicted that transition into teenagehood and also how lonely that could feel. It was a story that I feel like I'm still glad that I read even though I'm not a teenager anymore. It was just very calm. I don't know how to explain it. It had this like very melancholic tone that I think is what stuck with me afterwards, because now every time I think about the book, I don't just think about what happens in the book, but mainly what I felt while reading it. Just comforting. I think that's the way I would explain the book. So Aristotle isn't done to discover the secrets of the universe. Now, I think I'm just feeling a little bit excited, so I'm actually gonna add 2 books to this honorable list. Okay, 1 book, sorry. Where is it? Oh my gosh. Obviously, Vicious by V.E. Schwab. I think the only reason why I hesitated to put this on this list was because I mentioned I did give this 5 stars when I did my wrap up because of how it made me feel, but then I think back on how I was feeling while reading it and I couldn't actually connect with the 2 characters. I didn't really like them. I think purposely they're unlikable, morally great characters, but I've read about morally great characters who I still think I have some sort of connection to, and I didn't feel that way with these 2 characters, mainly because I felt like maybe there wasn't much purpose behind what was going on, or maybe there was, I don't know, I just really didn't really connect with them well. But there were a lot of things happening, like I would say like the last few pages, like the last 100 pages or so of this book, that just had me reading and reading and reading because there was so much action and tension. I was just anxious the entire time. The last few pages almost feel like a movie in my head. I can see how the characters are moving, where they're at. I could imagine everything perfectly. That's what stuck with me after reading this book. I can't stop thinking about it because of that, and I do think that the concept of it overall and the way that it was written, going back and forth between timelines, made it very addicting and hard to put down. So let me just quickly give you a summary. So this book is about 2 friends, roommates, a research project gone wrong. That basically questions the idea of creating EOs who are extraordinary people with supernatural abilities that are caused because, I don't want to say because I think that would be a spoiler. 10 years later, one of these 2 characters is actually at a cemetery accompanied by one girl who we don't really know too much about yet. And these 2 best friends always seem to have had this like tension between them, lack of trust between them, and things might have escalated the 10 years that we don't know what happened between them. Obviously, you'll find out once you read this book. The chapters are really short because it goes back and forth between timelines between the present and 10 years ago. It leaves you on cliffhangers for both. You're just gonna want to keep reading because you'll want to figure out, okay, I'm done with this chapter, but now I want to go back and know what happened before, but now I want to go back to the present, and then before you know it, you'll be done with this book. So Vicious is definitely an honorable mention that I had to talk about because I'm also excited to read book 2. Where was it? Thank you so much for watching. Those were all of my favorite books of 2024. I hope that you enjoyed. I hope that even though some of these books were books that I had already talked about, you might have found something new or it didn't sound as repetitive. I just love talking about my favorite books, so I'm so glad if you made it all the way till the end. Please leave me this emoji, and I'm so thankful for you being here. I hope you have a great rest of the week or weekend. I love you very much, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!